Ya está, sí, sí.
Eva. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on the country or continent you are. We have people from more than 10 different countries attending this first webinar. I am Marta Pascual, President of the International Association of Youth and Family Judges and Magistrates. And I would like to start the webinar thanking Eduardo Resende Melo, our chief editor, for his great job dealing with these matters. And I would also like to invite to all of you to join the International Association, as we are an it's an interdisciplinary place where judges, prosecutors, public defenders, professionals for different disciplines or areas, researchers, as well as professors interest in the field of children's rights can join us. We have a monthly newsletter, the Traditional Chronicle, and we celebrate events all over the world, some of them in partnership with other associations, such as the Beloff or UNICEF, and we have also our international meeting each 4 years. Last one was in Paris at the UNESCO House, and next one will be in Mexico, November 2021, between 17 and 19. Well, about the webinars, as I told you, this is the first one, and we are having another one on Thursday related COVID and its consequences. Then we'll have one each month with different topics as the General Comment 24, interdisciplinary, good practices on alternative measures, and so on. Well, having said that, I want to give the floor to our first speaker, Tony Capizzi. Tony is judge of Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas, Juvenile Division in Dayton, Ohio, and he will be following his speech with a PowerPoint. Tony, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Tony Capizzi. I'm a judge in Ohio in the United States. And I'm going to start off this webinar by giving really a short overview of what due process is, and then going from there and talk about the challenges in the United States. And so, all right, sorry.
Yes.
Having a little technical difficulty here. There we go. Very simply, the definition. What is due process? I'm assuming it is the same pretty much all over the world, but this is the definition in the United States, and it's simply the conduct of legal proceedings according to established rules and principles for the protection and enforcement of private rights, including notice and the right to a fair hearing before a tribunal with the power to decide the case. And simply put, it's making sure that individuals, and in this case, we're talking about juveniles specifically, their rights are not lost, that they have individual rights that we must consider as we talk about how do we conduct proceedings, how do we treat them before they're charged, once they're charged, once there's a sentence issued, and then with issues of probation and parole. So it's all a matter of making sure that their hearings are done fairly and equitably for everybody. What's an emergency power? Because we're talking about during COVID. In the United States, there are two different situations whereby the courts have emergency powers. Under the federal laws in the United States, in federal courts, there's a specific code section which I listed in the PowerPoint. Then, because we have 50 states in the United States, each state also has the ability to create their own emergency powers. And in each state of the United States, there's a Supreme Court where the Chief Justice in every state can issue specific orders that affect all the judges and all the courts in each individual state. In our state, our Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor in Ohio, the first week of March of 2020, when the COVID emergencies hit the United States, because ours were 2 months later than many parts of the world, we were late to understanding the seriousness of the problem. We were therefore late in having orders issued. But our judge in Supreme Court in Ohio basically stopped all cases from going forward for a period of time. And we needed to make sure while that was happening, we allowed for process, for people to have due process, to make sure that they could get things done. I will say, I'm going to make available this PowerPoint presentation to all the participants. What's critical is that in each PowerPoint, there are notes slides. And on the notes pages, I give you all individually a lot of research that I collected getting ready for this. So if you look at this slide and the notes page, which you'll have access to as soon as they're distributed, there'll be a lot more background information, which will help you understand the specifics of this particular slide. So what happened in Ohio, we have the federal law, we have the state law, and then we have local law, the county law. I'm the administrative judge in my county. I preside over 12 judges, and I issued specific laws as to how we were going to deal with due process in Ohio. And so I want to show you two different decisions that I issued, two orders. The first one was the one I issued in March 16th, when it really hit Ohio and the United States very badly. I talked about how youth were going to be managed with the COVID situation. I talked about how we had to cancel certain hearings, but also have hearings that were emergency purposes only. So I issued this particular order on March 16th. That was at the height of the problems in the United States and in Ohio. And then you'll note 6 weeks later, I had issued an amended order because by my first order in March, I basically had to shut down. Instead of having 12 judges manage cases daily, I only had 2 judges coming to work. I have about 600 staff or 580 staff that work for my court. And during the crisis, over 450 could not come to work. And so many of those worked from home, but not everybody. Well, on June 10th, the one before you right now, I issued my second order, my last order, because between the March date and the June date, we better understood how to manage due process for children and families in this crisis. And when you look at these, you'll find out how I distinguish the kinds of cases that were going forward. Anything that was an emergency, we never shut down for, because we're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But for non-essential cases, we had to stop doing those to protect people because of health reasons, which we did. And so we know children are different. We understand that children can't be treated as adults. I'm sure you realize in the United States, juvenile courts were created back in 1899, when we decided that children, frankly, needed to be treated differently than adults. And with that said, over the years, the Ohio Supreme Court and the US Supreme Court came up with specific due process requirements for children, for juveniles that may be different than adults. In the very beginning, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, children have no due process rights. But over the last 25 years or more, the United States has finally realized children have due process rights. Children are different in many ways, but deserve the same due process rights that everybody else in the United States has. And so what happened during COVID? I'm embarrassed by this number, but in the United States on any given night, there are 15,660 young people who are detained in the United States. I think that's a huge amount of children, even for the United States, but that's what it is. That's the average per day. So during the COVID crisis, we've had 560 children, which is 3.5% of all those detained youth who've caught COVID while they're detained, or they catch it, they then detained on a serious charge, and then they have it. So we've been dealing in my particular court in Ohio. I have had 3 young people come to my court come to my detention facility who have been testing positive. So what have we done to maintain their rights? Well, there's three major areas where we talk about due process in the United States for children. These three different areas. Do we deal with it in detention and incarceration? How do we deal with it regarding court appearances? And how do we make sure they have appropriate representation, good attorneys? And so in each one of these areas, I'm going to highlight very quickly what we did. And it's pretty simple if you just look at that. Regarding detention and incarceration, we stopped letting new children in our system. I'll show you in a slide or two the numbers, how much we dramatically reduced the number of children that we allowed to come in. When a child was brought in because they picked up a very serious charge, and a very serious charge would be considered like an aggravated robbery with a gun. Could we find a way to not have those children detained, even though the charge was so serious? And we found ways to do that. When you do that, you have to give them appropriate support services. You have to suspend what you normally did. We had many, many court policies that had to be modified because we didn't want children in a detention facility unless absolutely necessary. And so in a period of 1 month, our detained cases went down by 24%. In a matter of 2 months, they went down by almost 60%. So we've done an amazing job of not keeping children incarcerated or detained.
Yeah.
Now, when we do have to have hearings, the next section, how do we do it? As I mentioned in the beginning, all non-emergency hearings were stayed, continued. If a child's not detained, we would normally hear a case in 30 days. If a child's not detained, I can stretch that out to 3 months or 6 months, which I did. We had many, many hearings by Zoom, by the technology that many of us are using today. I'm allowing every kind of hearing a child or family can be in, except for when they're have to be sent to a juvenile prison. This morning, it is now noontime in the United States in Ohio. I've had 10 hearings already today. And of the 10 hearings I had, we would normally always be in court. 8 of those 10, I was able to do completely by Zoom. The attorneys, social workers, child, parents, everybody was on a Zoom screen like this would be, or as you're watching on YouTube. If you had to come into my building, my second order, which you notice I issued, I now mandate every person entering my building to wear a mask. I have a combination in my building of 12 courtrooms, multiple staff facilities. I have a detention facility here. For the first week, frankly, I trusted people better. I gave them the right to wear masks voluntarily, thinking they would. 25% of people coming into my building were refusing to wear a mask, even though we gave them a mask. If you didn't come to my court with a mask, I still gave them a mask. Well, a week into that, I decided it was not safe enough for my court employees, as well as other parents and children. So now if you want to have a hearing in my court, again, I have 12 courts here, you have to wear a mask. You have to be wearing it at all times. And so we allowed people to appear. Some courts in the United States have not allowed anybody into their court building. I don't believe that was necessary. We used this approach. So we are now at 100% of where we were before COVID hit, and making sure children have due process, either by video for their appearances or in person, depending on the case. And finally, the third very, very critical part of this is to make sure these young people and their families, because I have delinquency cases, but also I do abuse, neglect, dependency cases for children who are abused. I needed to make sure that their attorneys were skilled. As we all know, as people get older, they're not used to change. They don't want to change. And I've had many attorneys in my court, I'm going to say over 50 or so, not the numbers, over 50 in age, who don't want to use Zoom, who don't want to use technology. And if they don't use it, as far as I'm concerned, it's ineffective assistance of counsel. So I've had to remove those attorneys who aren't willing to work with this. We do allow, and this is unique, when I have some people in the courtroom and some people by Zoom, we're allowing attorneys to meet with their clients in separate breakout rooms of Zoom, which again, the due process is to have a hearing, but to have good representation and allow the attorney to speak to the child in a timely way. And so that was really critical to make sure that each child felt they could speak to their lawyer independently of the court process. We had an interesting case yesterday where I had 2 interpreters and a lawyer and a guy named Lightem for a child. And the challenge of doing that by Zoom was very interesting, but technology allowed us to do it. It allowed us to make sure that we gave due process, also make sure that the people that didn't understand English had appropriate interpreters present to manage it. So that was really critical. Oops, I'm sorry, did it the wrong way. I want to show you a survey only because these numbers are what I talked about earlier. The number of children I had in detention because of COVID has gone down over 50%. And what happened, and this number is pretty amazing. We reduced our numbers of children in detention by 50% over a period of 2 months. It took 7 years to do that before COVID. So COVID, you can argue, had many negative consequences, but one positive consequence, I feel, is that it has taught us as judges in the judiciary and the justice system, look for more creative ways to keep children out of jail, keep them safe in the community with extensive services. And so we thought that was very, very critical to make sure that we maintain due process. We gave these young people their chances to do things and have representation and yet have their hearings on a timely basis. So again, I don't want to say much anything positive about COVID, except it taught us to use technology much better. It taught us to give to youth better options, alternatives, much more support services that I can tell you in my community, in my state, even when COVID is past us, we will use these resources, these new technologies to better run our courts, better give our children legal representation, much quicker representation too, at the same time making sure that their due right processes are managed. With that, I know there's going to be questions at the end. So I'm going to end my presentation at this point. I want to thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation about this. And when you get this, this is my information if you want to copy it down. If you're international and you want to reach me, the best way to reach me is my international email address, which is my acapizzi22@gmail.com. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have either during this webinar or later. And I would love to help you all over the country and all over the world as we deal with these issues that are affecting the children and families that we all serve. Thank you, Marta.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tony, for how you pointed the situation in your state and the large number of juvenile tested and the effort of using Zoom to be in contact with the children, and also the use of masks in the personnel and how many of them accepted and others refused. We are going to listen to our second attendant speaker. She is Prosecutor Maxxi Wantzen from Itzehoe, Germany. I don't know how to pronounce it. All the German names are difficult, but she told us before that it's a town next Hamburg. Maxxi is working in the regional court, and now you have the floor, Maxxi. It's your time.
Thank you very much, Marta. I hope you can hear me over.
Yeah.
Hello to everybody. After all, I have to say, like I heard Tony, we are not into all this new technology in German justice. We are far away from that. But I start my presentation like I planned it. A few words about the situation in Germany in advance. As of yesterday, we had about 200,000 people confirmed COVID-19 cases in Germany. We have less than 10,000 dead people with correspondence a rate of 4.7. So I think we don't have so much need like in the United States to get to new things to do. Yeah. Meanwhile, we have a total of many districts in Germany which transmit 0 cases of new COVID-19 infection. So we have only a few parts in Germany which have a high infection, but we mostly done it. The first COVID-19 cases in Germany were notified in January 2020, but the real pandemic started in March 2020. Like you can see on a figure which is in March 6, we get up really high. I'm sorry, I'm not able to get this figure on the desk right now. I tried it, but I didn't get it. And we get a really high number of cases, and then we get a curve which slows down. And the federal government here in Germany responded to the increasing number of infected people. On March 10th, events with more than 1,000 visitors were cancelled. On March 13th, the school was closed. On March 15th, the reintroduction of border controls to the neighbor states have taken place. And on March 16th, the restriction on public life took place. That means restaurants, bars, cinemas, leisure facility stores, religion events, and prohibited in certain shops were closed. Nationwide, distance and hygienic rules must be observed. A distance of 1.5 meters to other individuals must be maintained in public spaces, and non-medical face masks must be worn on public transport and in shops and in all federal states. In addition, citizens are encouraged to keep the number of people they have contact with low and to keep the group of people as constant as possible. But as you might know, we have a federal system in Germany too. So the federal states themselves decide on the gradual opening of public life after March and after April. And they started to the opening in May and June by taking into account the regional development of the COVID-19 infection numbers. This leads to different regulation in the individual federal states. For example, in the state I work, I'm right now allowed to meet up with 10 persons in the public, whereas in Hamburg, where I live, which is 30 kilometers away, I'm only allowed to meet with one other person or member of one another household. Since 1 week in Germany, we also have a Corona warning app, but the use of it is voluntary. Overall, we had drastic restriction into public life in March and April, but we did not have an exit lock in Germany like they had it in Italy or Spain in Europe. Due to the restriction to public life, justice had also to face many challenges. As of the beginning of the 3rd week in March, there were almost no public court hearings taking place. We could only do the parts of work for which we needed no personal contact to other people. I myself, I have been skiing in Austria, and I was infected too as one of the first persons here in my town. So I was the one who forced our whole house of the prosecution building, which is about 200 people. They couldn't work in the building anymore, and everybody had to stay home in quarantine. And because I went to court too, the court had to stay in quarantine too. So we had a lockdown for like 2 weeks. After about 3 weeks here in Germany, the judges started again to hold their sessions, but initially only really urgent hearings. At the same time, the federal government has created a law that allows us to public hearings to be interrupted for longer than the usually 3 weeks. So you have to know, in Germany normally you can interrupt a public hearing for 3 weeks. Afterwards, if you need longer time, you have to start it new. But they make a law so you can interrupt it for longer, which is mostly important if people are in prison, because you have to hurry up the process. Unlike in civil law in Germany, it is not possible under criminal law, and especially in juvenile criminal law, to refrain from the personal presence of a defendant. The witnesses must also testify personally in court, so we cannot use Zoom or any other digital help in court. And even they started to change these things in civil law and other systems of law, the German government didn't think about to change it in criminal law. So we still have always to appear there by person. So if you come to court, you have to confirm that you are not sick. And of course, you have to wear a mask. But other than Tony's told us, we have no problems with this restriction. Most of the people, I have to say, do do what they ask to do in the situation. Of sure, we have some less attorneys who interrupt, but they would interrupt everything. So it's fine. I have experienced in one process, for example, that we have the psychiatric expert. We brought him to court via video. We tried it and everybody confirmed to it, so we can make it, but actually it would not be allowed in German crime court. We also had the problems to get the juveniles into the prisons after they had the sentence. The prison sets up quarantine stations pretty quickly, so that at least juvenile sentence could be carried out again. Of course, it should not be underestimated that the right to visit was restricted, sporting activities were not permitted, and school and work also did not take place in prison. So this means to the prisoners, they were simply locked away for more or less than 23 hours, which is not really good for a juvenile, but which we couldn't change because of the situation. Actually, most of the people say the prisons in Germany were the most safe place not to get COVID-19 in Germany, and we had no case luckily we had no case in a prison with a COVID-19 infection. Other than with a real prison, it was definitely different, and it's partly still different in the case with the so-called youth arrest. This is a short-term imprisonment for up to 4 weeks in Germany. In Germany, this is a particular case if young people or adolescents have not fulfilled the actual requirements of the court. No youth arrests were carried out in all federal states in Germany in either March or April. And in Schleswig-Holstein, where I work, we will start to do the arrest from July on. As a result, some arrests can no longer be enforced due to the statute of limitation, and some arrests are no longer proved to be pedagogically meaningful due to the passage of time. And maybe you can see the juveniles who didn't went to arrest, they don't do any other crime either, so maybe we don't need the arrest either. You never know. However, there were also problems with the implementation of the so-called working conditions for the juveniles. The social worker had to develop new concepts that could be carried out in compliance with the clearance and hygienic regulations. They tried to do it outdoor, most of the working conditions, and luckily we had a sunny and dry spring in Germany, so the social worker started to be really experimental to try to do those working conditions. But it's hard because no group work was allowed, and as we all know, group work is a good thing for juveniles. They can learn from each other and help each other. Yeah. And if we start, because I'm a prosecutor, and if we start at the beginning of an investigation, even the police couldn't work. They couldn't question the witnesses, and they couldn't question the accused for about the first 2 or 3 weeks in Germany because of the limitations and because the police needed to restrict themselves so they could still work in case of real emergency. Yeah, and one has to speak of good luck that the restriction in public life have also reduced crime in Germany further time. We had less cases of less crime cases in that time because of the nearly lockdown. And to end in this sense, I'm very confident that the justice and everyone involved to the youth proceedings here in Germany will deal with the areas promptly, and we will get on state again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Maxxi, for explaining us so clearly about the pandemic that started in March in your country and how it got down and the challenges of changing the working condition. Now, our next speaker is Mary Beloff. Mary is a professor, Dr. Mary Beloff is a chair of criminal law and criminal procedure at the University of Buenos Aires. Professor Beloff has the responsibility of providing continuing education to judges, prosecutors, public defendants, as well as NGOs members. Mari lives and works in Argentina like I do, so it's a pleasure that you are going to talk to all of us. Mari, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marta, Eduardo, for having me here. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to discuss these issues that concern us all for many years, and it's really an honor to be here. And I just in this short time I will I'm here as a law professor, not as a practitioner, so I will slightly move from the practical aspects of the current situation regarding the COVID-19 to a more theoretical conversation on the present and the future of juvenile justice in Latin America. It's huge aspiration. I will just name some bullet points because I think these complicated times can also be an opportunity to renew our ways of thinking about children rights and juvenile justice. On the one hand, due to the technological aspects of the situation that were clearly mentioned by Judge Capizzi, but also in terms of thinking, we usually don't have time to stop and think about what we are doing in our work, because it's so urgent, and we need to take decisions immediately. So this is at least for me, became an opportunity to think with time, and that's what I want to share with you this morning, afternoon. I don't know, times are different in the world. So let's start. One of my main concerns for years has been the connection between law and social change, and for sure this crisis will have impact in the future. I mean, the COVID crisis. But I don't want to focus on that, because from my perspective, and I may be wrong, the COVID crisis in Latin America just added more intensity to the already complicated situation we always have in our region. I don't know if Marta would agree with me, but this is, the most, I think it's out of discussion that Latin America is the most unequal region in the world. I think 11 of the 20 most unequal countries in the world are here. So COVID just intensified our problems regarding inequality, violence, corruption, gender violence, and all the suffering, particularly our the most vulnerable people among us have been suffering for years. So I don't want to focus on that. Just one data from Argentina. It was not easy, Marta, to get the number. I was trying to get the number for today. I think we have around 1,000 children in prison as of today, more or less. Exact number. It's almost half of them are in your jurisdiction, Marta, the Provincia of Buenos Aires and the city of Buenos Aires. But that's the number in Argentina. And the judiciary is in the federal judiciary is closed. This is a very strange situation in terms of the rule of law. But in some jurisdiction, courts are working with all the precautions you mentioned, both Maxxi and Tony. In our country, we wear face masks if we have to get out. That's a law, and we obey. We try to, especially if you are at court. So that's working. So that's data regarding the Argentine situation. So let's get back to the theoretical idea I wanted to share with you, colleagues, this morning. So I think it's a simple idea. I think in Latin America we have a problem with models. We fall in love with models, and we used to have the what we call the tutelar, the classic model regarding child rights, minors, as we used to call them before, and then we move towards a new model. At the same time that we were moving from the inquisitorial model to the adversarial model. It's similar to the change you were having in the, not regarding the adversarial system, but the child rights thing in the States in the 60s. It's more or less the same situation. And but we didn't pay attention to your process, and we are at the point, from my perspective, to just to commit the same mistakes. Let me explain that. Yeah, for me, the question is that when we introduced these changes, it was a main consequence of adopting international human rights law. That's a difference with the states. So international human rights law was adopted in Latin American countries at the same time that Latin American countries were trying to move from the inquisitorial model into the adversarial systems of criminal law. But the problem was that we translated international child rights law through the adversarial lens. So the consequence of that was that slowly our new juvenile justice systems were getting closer to the adult systems. We don't have transfer. That's, I think, I'm not quite sure in Bolivia, but I'm pretty sure everywhere here, it's forbidden to transfer cases from the juvenile jurisdiction to the adult jurisdiction. But in practical terms, more than 90% of cases are decided through a plea. So if it is not a fact that our juveniles are faced to the consequences of the adult an adult trial, they don't have a trial at all, and they don't have the chance to learn what happened, to have a connection with the victim and with the community in rehabilitative terms. So that, for me, that's the main problem. We focus on due process, which is, as you mentioned, Tony, essential part of this thing, but we lost focus on the reintegration, on the restorative aspect of the juvenile justice, which is also a requirement of the international human rights law. So, and that for me, that the explanation for that is because we focus so much on the model that we lost the principles. It was so important for us to fully introduce the new model that we were like don't paying attention to the fact that 90% of children don't have trials. They don't get proper restorative or alternative measures that can avoid them to go to prison or to really have a better life in the future. And I think we should. Another thing I wanted to mention, I don't know, maybe Renate can help us later to understand this. If you look at the general comment 2024, the general comment regarding the juvenile justice, in English, the version refers to this thing as the right to a fair trial. But in Spanish, it was translated as independent judiciary. I don't know, what was that? It was like, oh, that's it. Of course, having an independent judge it's a basic guarantee, but it's a complete different idea. And I was wondering why. I wanted to ask Renate why, if she knows why this was understood that way, because it's and it's very I'm particularly mentioning this because in my, and just to, I don't know if I have time, I have time, Marta, how am I doing?
It's okay, it's okay.
Okay,
yes,
great.
yes, you have time.
Ah, thank you. Because this idea of impartiality, for me, it is deeply connected to the idea of having specialized judges, which is the main idea of this seminar. So how we connect, how do we connect the idea of special, a different treatment, which is more concerned about rehabilitation, restorative processes, and at the end, giving a new chance to the girl, the boy, to start a better life with due process warranties. This is, I think, this is the thing we weren't able, still, we haven't been able to solve in Latin America, because when we want to change the system, because the old system was too focused on rehabilitation, and we lost sight of the legal, the due process warranties, and the children were put in a position completely worse than adults, that was for sure. But now we are treating children as adults. And that's a completely Pyrrhic, can I say that? Pyrrhic triumph. That's not a victory of child rights from my perspective. So the challenge for me, the thing we should be more concerned now is how to if we really take child rights seriously, we cannot only focus on due process rights. That's the basis. As human rights, children are entitled to have a due process, all due process guarantees. But they are, that's a human rights as persons. But as children, they are entitled to more, to all the positive state obligations that in this field, in juvenile justice, are directly connected to the right to preventive measures, restorative justice, and rehabilitation. That's not, these state obligations are not the same than the obligations to respect the freedoms of children. So we need to reconcile, I think our duty is to reconcile these two state obligations, to respect the due process guarantees, but also to fulfill this mandate to restorative justice, to prevention, to rehabilitation, if we really want to make the child rights law a reality. If not, what we will be doing is just to have a small juvenile justice, exactly like the adult justice. But that's not the promise of the international law. That's not what we were supposed to do in this field when we were working on changing laws, because we wanted to change reality. So far, we haven't been able to do that, but I hope the future will be better, particularly with people so engaged and so committed to child rights as you all. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mari. I completely agree with your figures about Latin America. And I would like just to add that nearly 53% of the adults will lose their jobs after the pandemic, and about 50% of children and adolescents will stay under the line of poverty in Latin America. So they are so huge numbers to pay attention. And I like your point that we are all pointing the model of justice, but we are losing in some way the rules of due processes, or to implement restorative measures, pedagogical measures, and the rules of the fair trade. Now, our last speaker is Dr. Renate Winter. She was former president of our international association, president of the Residual Court of Sierra Leone, and president of the United Nations Committee of Children, where now she is the vice president. And I want to add that Renate is a lighthouse for all the people that work with children. Thank you, Renate. You have the floor.
No, it goes. Thank you very much for the lighthouse. I'm rather light tower because I am 1.80 meters, so I am known for that in this regard. It's a bit difficult for me now to conclude because quite a lot and the most important things have been said already. Being a judge as Tony, we are coming from a similar background and have similar ideas. Being an Austrian, I have a similar situation in my country like Maxxi had it in Germany. So I am not going to tell you exactly the same things once again. I would like to add to the problems that Mary brought up, because I am coming from the Committee of the Rights of the Child, and there we have decided several things, and I would like to bring them to you because I think that is a basic orientation that can help. Let me say it very, very bluntly and very undiplomatically in the beginning. What we are now trying to do in Corona times is just the obvious that we should do all the time, not only in Corona. Besides wearing masks and these kind of things, which is just only administrative issue, we should deal with what is really the essence and what has Corona told us now. Concerning the questions that Mary asked, first of all, when we speak about fair trial, speaking about fair trial and why it has been translated in Spanish as independence of judges, I do not know. What I do know is that fair trial as a prerogative of fair trial, one among others, is the independence of judges. Coming from the UN, again, from the committee, I can tell you that very, very few countries worldwide have really independent judges. Maybe this is the reason why in Latin America we have a lot of countries where there is no independence for judges, that you have translated it this way. This would be an explanation. But fair trial has nothing to do as such with how the judges do feel and so on, because the judges have to react to what we call use justice. And for this, I'm coming again to the wording. The committee decided not to speak about juvenile justice or juvenile courts any longer, because it has a very bad and discriminating connotation. We speak about child or about youth. So we speak about the law for youth and children, or we speak about a youth court, but not about the juvenile court or juvenile justice anymore at all. That is one thing that maybe we can agree on, because it works a little bit against the discrimination of children in conflict with the law. But when we speak about fair trial, then we have also to speak about children in contact with the law, because we have to use to have their fair trial issues taken into consideration as well. Not only the children in conflict with the law have fair trial rights. The children in contact with the law, in civil justice, administrative justice, as victims and witnesses, have the same rights that we have to take into consideration. Now, another issue is the terminus minor. A minor is less. No? Minor is always meaning less. And therefore, we also do not need and do not like to use the word minor anymore. So in the general comment number 24, you will either find the word youth or the word child, because the definition of the child is from 0 to 18, and it englobes everyone, youth and small children. So that would be something that now Corona can transport, if we agree all on that. Concerning now the issue of definitions, Tony has brought us all the necessary definitions. What is not so clear, and it's a bit difficult for me to speak about the US and Tony, because the US, as you know, is the only one country that has not ratified the convention. So they're always a little bit apart outside. But as other countries have the adversarial system as well, we can address those problems nevertheless, without mentioning the US. There is no difference between due process and alternatives and restorative justice at all. Because if you read the general comment number 24, you will see that due process rights are mentioned there, including the pluses that you need for children. So the special needs of children are included in the due process rights mentioned in the convention and mentioned especially in general comment number 24. There is no difference. And restorative justice is part of it. And now I am coming to my real problems in this issue, because restorative justice is an answer, and in many countries is the answer to the Corona problems. We have now, as I said, children in conflict with the law. The very first thing that has been mentioned by Tony, by Maxxi, I am mentioning as well, because that was the very first thing that the youth justice system has had as an answer, is don't get children in prison, first of all. Try to do whatever you can, and it was mentioned again by Tony and also by Maxxi, try to do whatever you can not to get them in. Not in police custody. Police people are absolutely unhappy for the first time in their lives to have the children there, because they don't want to get sick. And this is a kind of methodology that we can use to teach them. If in the law you have 24 hours, it is a maximum and not something to keep a child even longer. Forget it. Send the child somewhere else, in a family, in a foster family, whatever, but don't keep it. This is for the police custody. The same goes for pre-trial detention. We have a huge amount of alternative for pre-trial detention. And quite a lot of countries like mine, Austria, is using those. Another small country where I am working for the European Union, Georgia, in the middle between Europe and Asia, is using all those as well. We are small countries. This is maybe a bit different from the huge ones like Germany or the US. But nevertheless, the systems are the same. We have in my country, which is a country that uses only restorative justice for children. Yeah? We have from 100% of children committing a crime, we have only 20%, 20 who even coming to court, which means for 80% we use alternatives. And I do not need to tell you about the alternatives, because there are quite a lot of alternatives, and almost all those alternatives work in Corona times. Yeah? Because I can't do community work alone somewhere. Yeah? I do not have to do it 5 of us together. I can do what I have promised alone, and can only contact a social worker or a probation officer whatsoever to deal with alternatives and to do the rest of it electronically. This is possible. Austria has had a similar setup like Tony told us about the masks, about the possibility for video conferencing at court and so on. These possibilities are possibilities for countries who have the money to set it up. Not all countries have the money to set it up. For Germany, I do not know why they do not go there. They have a law that is rather unflexible, but to a certain extent, the law is flexible enough to have video conferences, especially for children. This is possible and is done in several of the Bundesländer, as far as I know. Concerning now the difficult part of it are prison as punishment. And there, the judges have said in most of the countries, we are not going to send children to, as a punishment to prison if there's any other chance to do something like that, to use an alternative, sorry. And the second part is, how do I get the children out of prison? The door out policy. And the door out policy was also, especially in Europe, quite strong. As much as possible, children have been sent out of prison with probation, with supervision, with family supervision. Some countries use bracelets, whatever, but out of prison. So that in quite a lot of prisons, you have the possibility to have one room for one child, which is a guarantee not to get infected. And we are in the same situation as Maxxi told about Germany. One of the safest places not to get corona is a prison, a juvenile prison, not an adult prison. The problems, for instance, in visiting, also in many countries, also in my country, visits have been forbidden, which is a huge problem, especially for children. But there are, again, alternatives. Like, for instance, several NGOs in several countries, not only in mine, have tried to get a child in prison in contact with a child outside of prison for writing either emails, telephone calls, or writing letters, which was an alternative to the isolation of the children without visits. That was possible. And this doesn't cost a lot of money. So it's not an excuse for a country with no money or not so much money not to have this kind of alternatives, at least. Another issue that we had to guarantee, and we guaranteed it all the time, again, the same with Maxxi, as she said, there is a 7 days, 24 hours service for the judges, for the prosecutors, for the lawyers and for the social workers to immediately grant access to justice for children in conflict and in contact with the law, both. And these contacts are available, as I said, all the time, and can decide if this is a burning case that you have to deal with immediately, or a not so burning case, or a case that doesn't burn at all, that can wait. And there are the possibilities that you can extend time, as has been told by Maxxi, and these possibilities have, in most of the countries, the presidents of the Supreme Courts of the different countries to have possibilities to give solutions for everyone. We call that, like Anthony, emergency powers. So what can be done? And this can be done in the justice system by the presidents of court. It is not even necessary to have the president of the Supreme Court doing that. In several countries, for instance, you have the judges at court behind plexiglass. And you have the people in court with the masks, but nevertheless, they are there. Like in many European countries, you cannot have a court session only, a complete court session only via video conference. You cannot. You have to have the defendant and the witness present, but with plexiglass, with masks, with video, with plexiglass in front of you, you can deal with this issue. It is possible. The only one thing is that you have to have video security, because you have to grant the very first guarantee of a fair trial, namely the transparency and the opening. So if you close the courts because of the corona, the trial would not be valid. You cannot close the court if you want to have a valid trial. The outcome there again, and the solution that has been brought in, was to have a video from the court trial for the open public. And then you have this guarantee. Restorative justice, as I said, is a huge answer for quite a lot of things, because you can have mediation, for instance. Mediation you can do electronically as well. You can have, like we are discussing with each other, you can have a mediator, the victim and the offender, discussing electronically. This is possible. It has been done in my country, it has been done in Georgia, it has been done in other countries as well. So one of the main goals of restorative justice, to have the people together to speak about the problems, is granted by mediation. And mediation is working in Corona times electronically. As I said, services, like for instance, you ask a child to clean up the room where he has stolen something, that can be done on a Saturday alone. Corona is not a possibility to say, no, you cannot do that. The only one thing is it costs time and it costs interest. And if the judges and the prosecutors, in my country, it's the prosecutors, because restorative justice is in the hands of the prosecutors. If they are interested, it will work. If they are not, it will not work. I tried to come from the international part, because believe me, in the international situation for children under Corona, the justice problems are the least. We have had a huge program already for girls not to be married off at the age of 6, 7, 8. We were already internationally at least 10 or 12. Now we are falling back. Now families are going to marry their girls off age 6, 7 again for saving money, or because they have no other choice. We have a huge amount of children working now. Child labor again coming up at a huge percentage in Latin America, so your reasons, in Africa, in Asia. It's a really huge problem, and there is no way for the justice system to interfere in this regard. Not even what is the meaning of the legal issues concerning labor if I do not even have the possibility to eat. Yeah. So the justice systems that we can have and that we should have should just to work at court with the most serious cases and leave the other one to the restorative justice system. That is something that you also can find in general comment number 24. And this is what I am going to end up with my time is over, as I can see, is please don't forget the obvious. Don't forget the obvious. The fair trial is the basis for everything. We cannot have justice without fair trial, including everything that means fair trial, due process. No difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renate, for refreshing us the obvious, the rules of the due process and how to use the vocabulary. We have to talk about child and youth, and words say or mean a lot. So, and for your perspective and from the world and the situation of the children. Well, we have plenty of questions. So first, I'm going to start with Tony and with Maxxi. I'm going to read the question for both of us. Tony, what was the main obstacle you found when doing audiences by Zoom, and how do you reduce the unnecessary extension of the process for children? And for Maxxi, if you think that is change for children that already were deprived of liberty after the COVID outbreak. See if something changed for children in your country.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. Maxxi, did you think that anything changed for children that were deprived of liberty after the COVID outbreak? Do you think anything changed in Germany? Okay, first. Did you understand, Maxxi?
I think.
Okay. Okay. If there were any change because of this worldwide pandemic, or focusing on your country.
Max, you want to go first?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure. Do you mean change in prison or change in jail or change in general?
That's the question. I'm not the one that I'm answering, and I'm asking. It says
I just start because I think changes. If you go on changes in general, the children are, like we already heard, even in Germany, where we have a working school system, a working social system, because the children don't go to school, it means that the children of rich people, they have help at home to do the schoolwork, and they have computers, they have laptops, they have notebooks, they have everything they need for working for the school. But people which live in less good social situation, and if they don't go to school, we all can assume that they hang around at home, they don't do their schoolwork, they don't have the parents who can maybe help them. So I think we, even in Germany, we do have a spread out of the difference get bigger. So yeah, that's a thing that's general for children. They do, even I go to work and I meet people at work, but the children who don't go to school and who are not allowed to go out and meet more than one friend at the same time, for them it's really hard because they don't have the social context. And I think because of less social context for children, it will be different. And we can't now estimate what this will mean for our children right now.
Thank you.
Marta, to answer the question that was presented to me, I do believe virtual hearings in the long run are where we all have to go for certain types of cases. I have found that with the virtual hearings, I am forcing the attorneys to be better prepared before it starts. I'm not sure about all of you judge, but so often I have a case for a child, and it'd be the first time the prosecutor, defense attorney even meet. And that would delay things down. They delay it too much. So I'm now demanding, before I ever have a Zoom pretrial, that the attorneys have met, discussed things, so that when we do a Zoom meeting, it's better for the child, it's quicker justice for the child. I agree with Renata. We were slow in dealing with restorative justice. And we started that in the United States, but what COVID has done, it's forced us to do restorative justice in the beginning. We should be doing all these things before a child is arrested or before the child has to be detained. If we gave the family the services up front, we save so many children from going to jail and even being ever charged or convicted. We charge too many children with charges. If we let their community with restorative justice work with that child and that family, they wouldn't be before our justice system. Our justice systems are terrible for children. As great as we say they are, it's not good for children to be there. So we are forcing ourselves to finally convince people, like the police, like probation officers. We have too many probation officers that want to hang on a child, that want to find what's wrong with a child. And so I think Zoom, I think coronavirus will change us forever by making us do restorative justice earlier on to help these children, these families. And I would say one thing about the United States, this is a touchy subject to me, because she mentioned the United States hasn't signed international rights. We're 50 states. I would say to you, the states of the United States have signed them in theory. The government, the federal government, is still way behind and doesn't do it. But I would just say to you, as I talk internationally, instead of blaming the United States, look at the countries, look at the states, Ohio, New York, California. We are very progressive in the rights for children, and that's why I want to focus. So I hope I answered the question, Marta.
Thank you very much. Now the questions for Mari and Renate. Mari, you mentioned that in Latin America, the children have no contact with the victim. Do you think restorative approach could help with this? And the difference in translation of the General Comment 24 is very interesting. Do you think it has something to do with a concern the United Nations might have here? And for Renate, what is the situation with children trafficking? No, children, is it worse now before, or was it worse with the COVID? Mari. No sé quién da el micrófono. Okay.
Thank you for the questions. First, regarding the victim, perhaps I made not myself clear enough. I didn't mean to say that children or adolescents don't have contact with victims. What I wanted to emphasize is that even though all Latin American laws are very progressive, modern, we changed the laws in the last 20 years, engineering, the architecture of the system didn't change. So even though the laws says clearly state that there is the right included in the due process guarantees of children to have restorative justice, in real life that happens just occasionally, because we don't have the institutional arrangement. We wasted all our efforts and time changing laws all the time. We change laws in Latin America, but we don't go to the practices, to the real stuff. That's, if I can say that. So that's I for sure. If we could comply with these new laws, change our institutional arrangements, and start dialogue between with the child within his or her community, for sure that would be not only good for the kid or the girl, but also for the whole community, and that also would imply complying with international laws. That was my point. I know adversarial system, the adversarial model can help, but only if we don't understand it as a punitive system. Because if the focus is on is only put on the punishment, and bargaining punishment, even less punishment, that's not according to child rights law, because child rights law requires us to look for better answers, not just punishment or a lesser punishment. That was one question. And sorry, Marta, the next one.
The one was about the translation of the general.
Yes. I don't know. I should ask Luis Pedernera, my dear friend, why they did that. But for me, as a scholar, it was a very interesting point, because I think the committee has done an extraordinary work on this in the last 20 years, and it is so important for us everywhere, but particularly for us in Latin America. We follow their guidelines very carefully. So this is a very interesting point. I don't know. I will ask. I promise.
Okay, thank you, Renate. Your question about trafficking.
Yes, answer is very quickly, yes.
Okay.
Due to the situation where the monitoring systems do not work at all, or not work very well at all anymore, trafficking has increased, and especially increased concerning children for pedophilia and concerning children for hard work. Yeah, both. Concerning pedophilia, because due to the corona situation, many children started to work or to use more and more the computers and electronic possibilities. And that was exactly where the darknet jumped in and had a huge amount of pedophiles trying to get in contact with the children. And that was the source of the increase. They found now in the last 2 weeks, I think they found 3 huge international, how to say, pedophilia communities to having used this, the darknet, and having used especially the contact with children, because nobody has no time to look into what children are doing. What I would also like to say is concerning Luis, please, many of the Committee of the Rights of the Children's members speak English and French. Spanish, only very few. They are not able to look into the translation, the verbal translation from English into Spain. If you find a problem with translation, please write it, tell us, because we are going then to fight for it. But we do not know. I am speaking French, and my Spanish is very poor. I am speaking French and English for translation, but I can understand Spanish, but I can certainly not correctly translate. So do that, please. That is something I would like to say. Concerning, again, adversarial system and restorative justice is not excluding each other in no way. New Zealand is one of the countries with the adversarial system since the beginning, and the best amount of examples they have to give to the whole world in restorative justice is this adversarial country. It's not excluding each other. Please, thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, our time is over. So I want to deeply thank the 4 speakers. And we have many more questions. I want to tell that this webinar will be hung on YouTube platform in a couple of hours, and you can have in your own language just pressing a button at the above there in Portuguese, Spanish, in German, English or American English. So it will be translated, and it's incredible how many people then listen to the webinar. And as I said before, I want to invite all of the attendants to join our international association, as well as our next webinar next Thursday that Eduardo Resenda is developing and has a lot of work in the association's webinar. That is, as you said before, that we are dealing with children and with this different way of contacting. This is a new, an easy way to be in contact and to share idea, as we are for so far away countries, interchanging idea, practices, and documents and so on. So thank you very much, and I wish we can see soon together. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, Eduardo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maxxi. Renate, nice to see you.
Pleasure for me as well. Don't forget to send me the chronicle. I didn't get the last ones.
Okay, Maxxi, we have a little time. You know, I have a daughter living in Germany.
Oh, where does she live?
So I used to go to Germany once a year. She lives in near Frankfurt. Because she works for SAP.
Ah, I know that. Yeah, it's next one. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Bye-bye from my side.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Ciao.
I have to check my children, what they're doing, if they mess up the whole house.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Bye.
nice to meet you.
Bye. Keep in touch.
Yes.